It is? Oh, that's fine. Okay, thank you. Okay, it's time for us to begin the class this morning. You notice Mark isn't here. He's going to be in Martinsville today. But I think everybody else that's here, supposed to be here, is going to be here. So, if you remember this class that we did, we've been studying sin seriously. And last Sunday, Ian did unmerciful, and are you going to return to that one? Or are you just going to go straight into something else?
If you were going to do something on that,
yeah.
then I'll go straight into something.
Okay. Well, I know that I'm going to do a part for unmerciful, but this morning we're actually doing part number 2 of deceit. And if you remember, I told Wayne, I said, because I did a class and Ian was scheduled to do a class, and I said to Wayne, come back in 2 weeks. What's about 5 weeks later, and we're just now getting to do part 2 because of all the weather. So let's do a little bit refreshing this morning. So before we did deceit, we studied the sin of lying. And so does anybody remember how we actually defined a lie? We said it's not just misinformation, because we said a child can say 2 + 2 = 5. Well, that would be incorrect, but we can't say the child is lying just because they are incorrect. So we said there had to be certain characteristics to where we could say this is a lie.
It has to be the intent to deceive. It has to be intentionally. You have to know that it's not a truth. And the goal has to be to get somebody else to believe it to their detriment.
Okay, so we said you only left out one thing, and so we said it this way too. Knowingly falsifying the truth in order to either self-propel or do some harm to others. So that's what Ian said. You have to knowingly know the information is false, and you're trying to convince somebody, and it's probably going to be detrimental to them in some way. So we actually said some people would say it's a lie, but it didn't hurt anybody. And we said, no, people who take in these lies, it's going to be detrimental to them in some fashion. Maybe we don't recognize it right away, but it is always going to be the right thing and the best policy to tell the truth. It's going to be detrimental to other people to lie to them. So, how did we say deceit? Because we said there has to be a distinction between the two. Otherwise, why does the Bible list them separately? Lying is one thing, deceit is another. How did we define deceit? And like we said, this is 5 weeks ago. But if anybody can remember, we actually did it in a very simple and, if we would say, an open-ended way. It's withholding information to accomplish a particular goal. You don't tell everybody everything. What was our example? We used it multiple times. You're not lying, but you are withholding information that would be detrimental to the person. In Genesis 3, when the serpent was talking with Eve, the lie that he said was, you shall not surely die. But when he said to her, if you eat of the fruit, your eyes will be open and you will be as gods, that's exactly what God said later on. He said, the two of them eating the fruit, and they've become as one of us, knowing good and evil. So in that statement, when the serpent said, your eyes will be opened, that was a true statement. But he was intending to deceive them in that he did not give them the full weight of what they were doing. If you do this, this is what's going to happen. And a lot of times people say their response to being deceived is, if you had told me that it was going to be like this, then I wouldn't have done it to begin with. And this is what we said. It can be used for a good way. And we're going to look at it this morning, how an individual could actually use deception and it be for a righteous cause. And we said the intent is the determining factor whether or not it would be considered sinful or not. This is how the dictionary defined it. Well, it's very open-ended, even with these people who are the studied students of how this word would be used. The word group is positively meant to express just all-around ability. And then he says there is a positive use to the word or the idea of deception. We're doing a quick review and then we're going to get into it. Luke 16, 1-8, this was the unjust steward, and he did use deception. This unjust steward finds out that he's about to lose his job, and before he can lose his job, he goes around basically to make friends with all the people who owe his boss. People who owe 100%, he says, I'm only going to charge you 50. So, how is that withholding information? Basically, an employee comes around to the debtors and he says, hey, you know that bill that was 100%, we're knocking it down to 50. How is that deception?
He's not telling the client that his boss doesn't know about it.
Okay, so the person who is the debtor, later on is possible to say, well, he didn't tell us he was about to lose his job. We just thought this was a deal. So that's withholding information to accomplish a particular goal. But at the end of it, you see verse number 8. So we said this when we studied this in our Luke class and in our parable class. This is not that the Lord is justifying fraud. That's not what the Lord is doing here. But what the Lord is doing when he says in verse number 8, the Lord commended the unjust steward because he had done wisely, for the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. So really, all he's saying here is we need some of this type of thinking. We need a particular way of being crafty and wise. So he tells us, the Lord says to us, be harmless as doves and be what? Okay, wise as serpents. You know, when you basically hear in the Bible about a serpent, it's a negative connotation. But even the Lord says he's crafty, he's wise, and he says we need to have a little bit of that. So we're going to make application towards the end of the class, but this morning we have to look at the Bible to actually make a point to say, can we use deception lawfully? Some people would say ethical deception. Can we use ethical deception, or is it the case that all deception is going to be sinful? And so really all we're saying here is withholding information to accomplish a particular goal, is that always going to be wrong? Now, we don't have to basically do a poll. You just think about that for a second in your head. Are there going to be times to where we can withhold information to accomplish a particular goal and it not be considered sinful? So, let's go through our points of the Bible and actually see what there is. Here's our question. Is it possible that deception can be used for good? Is there such a thing called ethical deception? Now here we go. This is our first one. Withholding information to accomplish a particular goal, used for good or evil, the intent is what determines whether it's sinful or not. So this is 1 Samuel 16, and we're starting out with, I think, one of the biggest ones. James.
You can also find that in 1 Samuel 19, verse 7.
What? Well, I'll look at it. Do you remember what that is?
1 Samuel
1 Samuel 19:7?
17.
Oh, 19:17. That's right. And we can talk about that one too. Okay, thank you, James. That's a good one. So here's our first one. We'll get to James in just a little bit. I know I won't have it in the slides. 1 Samuel 16, 1 through 4. So, in 1 Samuel 16, I know we're not studying Samuel, but in 1 Samuel 15, you're basically having the moment where God says about King Saul, he says, I'm done with Saul being king. We're going to take the kingship away from him. We're going to give it to somebody else. That's the plans that are in the works. We're going to find a new king. Well, Samuel is going to be the individual to anoint a king. And look at how all this plays out. The Lord said unto Samuel, how long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thine horn with oil. Go, I will send thee to Jesse to the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons. There's our mission. We're finding a new king. And Samuel says, how can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, take a heifer and say, I'm going to sacrifice to the Lord. And call Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show thee what thou shalt do. And thou shalt anoint unto me him whom I name unto thee. And Samuel did that which the Lord spake, and it came to Bethlehem. 1 Samuel 16, 1 through 4. So, is he withholding information? Yes. Who told him to do it?
God.
God. Is he accomplishing a particular goal?
Yes.
Did he sin? If we say that he sinned, we're going to say that God told him to sin, because God is the one who orchestrated this entire plan. So here's basically how it would play out, and this would be a real life situation, how it would look. I mean, he's basically says somehow Saul is going to know that he's taking a trip. Number one, you can take a trip and it's nobody's business. I mean, that's one of the things that we're dealing with here. Somebody says, well, you didn't tell all the truth. In no realm of our life do I have to give out 100% of every detail of my life to everybody. I mean, are there not some people that you just get to say, it's none of your business? You know it. I know it. So this is how it would have played out. King Saul says, where are you going, Samuel? Oh, I'm going to offer a sacrifice to God. Then days later when he comes back, Samuel, you didn't tell me you were going to anoint a new king. You lied to me. Did he lie? No. Did he withhold a portion of the truth? Yes. He did that to accomplish a particular goal, knowing, he said, if I go do this. Now, what would somebody say? There's some people who just don't like this idea. So can we say this? Not liking a point does not make it incorrect. When we went through preaching school and we did classes on marriage and divorce, there were guys who would sit in the class and points would be made and they would say, I don't like that. And we would say, it's marriage and divorce. It's a tough topic. But they would say, I don't like that. And we said, well, we don't like any of it. But it doesn't make it wrong. People are going to have rights, and it may not appear at first to some people. So here we are. This is just point number one, y'all. Right away, a person would have to say under the weight of the evidence that God justifies us to use ethical deception. Now, someone who does not like this idea about ethical deception, they would say, well, to me it just kind of sounds fishy. It just sounds like something a Christian ought not do. What would they say about Samuel? What should Samuel have done to a person who says ethical deception just sounds fishy? What would be their advice? Y'all, there's a lot of people who would look at this text and what you and I are painting out of this. They would have said, well, Samuel said, if I go and anoint a king, Saul's going to kill me. And so some people would look at this text and they would say, Samuel should have just had the faith to go do what needed to be done and say, God will protect me. Well, you're arguing with God at this point. God doesn't say to Samuel, now Samuel, you shouldn't even be thinking that Saul's going to kill you because I'm going to protect you. No, God says, tell him you're going to go offer a sacrifice. When you get there, tell Jesse to come to your sacrifice, and I'll show you who's going to be the king. So, we have it right there painted out. God orchestrated the use of ethical deception. God tells Samuel to withhold information in order to accomplish a particular goal. I think we're pretty much in agreement. Was Samuel under a moral obligation to tell Saul, I'm going to anoint a new king? And I will say, y'all, that this type of stuff comes into, these are the realms that we're going to work in. So, what was the question that God asked Samuel before he sends him to anoint the king? We just read it. He said, how long are you going to do what? Okay, how long are you going to mourn for Saul? So, I'm all for it. I do believe it. Amongst friends, amongst your brethren, people talk about loyalty. That's a fantastic thing. I'm all for that. And so God has to say, Samuel has been with Saul for a long time, and God has to say to Samuel, okay, at some point, God is saying at some point we're going to have to move on here. And I know that Samuel, the way that we feel about each other and our friends, somebody would say, my conscience is bothering me. I feel like I'm being disloyal to my good friend Saul. But what's the real problem? Samuel's not being disloyal to Saul. What's the real problem?
On another king.
He didn't want to tell him that he was going to anoint him.
Okay, it's not that Samuel's being disloyal to Saul. Saul is being disloyal to God. Saul is more worried about self-promotion of Saul than he is about God's kingdom. Was he always that way? Somebody says, we've got a lot of history. Well, Saul wasn't always acting that way. He had been a very good king up until this point. But now we're basically coming to a point where somebody says, well, where's your loyalty? You are going down this track. I can't go with you down that track. And it's not that I'm disloyal. I have to be loyal to God. So some people, there's all kinds of ways to look at this. Somebody says, well, my good friend, I just don't think I could use ethical deception with my good friend. You know, if they're actually going around breaking different laws, then yeah, they're my good friend. But they're now becoming, when you're breaking God's law, it's a fugitive just like it is anything else. So we have it, number 1 in 1 Samuel 16. How's everybody feel about that? Okay, we're good with 1 Samuel 16. Now let's look at Genesis 12:13. This is another big one. So, again, this is going to be a point where somebody's going to say Abraham should have had more faith. I don't know about that. I think that's a pretty hard judgment. I don't know that I can make it, but I'm saying looking at the evidence of this text, let's talk about it. Genesis 12:13. What was Abraham's problem when he would go into all these foreign lands? What did everybody want to do with his wife? He had a good-looking wife. Everywhere they went.
He said, she's my sister.
That's it. Everywhere they went, appearingly, you see it in chapter 12 and you're going to see it again in chapter 20, he can't even come into town without rulers of the area saying, that is a good-looking woman and we would like to bring her in. Well,
the problem is that the easy way to make her available, if they tell the new king that she's his wife, is the simple thing to do is just kill him.
And that's what their thought was.
That's what they were thinking.
So, somebody's like Wayne is saying here, well, if she's married and he doesn't think they're godly people anyways, they have no problem killing a man, which is kind of strange, isn't it? If they have no problem killing a man, they have no problem with adultery.
Well,
Right?
we have the same thing today. People kill children, unborn children, and say, oh, it's just women's health.
Yeah, so you pick and choose and do what you want. Okay, well, here's our text. A lot of times people have a problem with this, and I will say up front, I don't have a problem with this. Genesis 12:13, Abraham says, I pray thee, say I pray thee, thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. So, here's what people are going to say about it. They're going to say, Abraham put his wife in a very dangerous situation. I don't think that he's just being careless, right? They both feel threatened. We go through all kinds of moments in our life where we apply our best judgment. And then later on somebody says, that wasn't the best idea. At the time, we thought we were doing all right. So he says, tell people you're my sister. He puts her in a dangerous situation. Number 2, people think she's available, like Wayne said. Some people are going to think she's available to be taken to wife. So you're putting those people in a situation. And then 3rd, someone comes in and says, well, he should have just trusted God. Well, I don't think that it's a moment of where I can't say that he's not trusting of God. I think that they might just be saying this is our best option. They've already left their homeland because they trust God. So I can't rob them of that. But let's look at this. He says, tell them you're my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. Now some people are going to say that's a lie. In your Bible, in Genesis chapter 20, verse number 12, when they do this a second time, they do it in chapter 12, and they're going to say it again in Genesis chapter 20. And the king in Genesis chapter 20 is going to say to Abraham, why did you tell me she was your sister? And Abraham says, indeed she is my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. Now, did he lie?
Sorta.
No, there's no sorta here, right? That's why we're doing this class, is because we're dissecting lying from deceit. Would any government official say he lied?
I don't know. That's a tricky little thing right there.
Yeah, I think everybody would say, nope, that's his sister. If you were in a court hearing and we had the blood tests and they shared a daddy, that's his sister. Now, did he use deception? Nobody's saying he didn't use deception. But even at the same time, I would have to ask this question, like we said, about the intent of it all. Was Abraham deceiving people with the hope that they would sin? He wasn't doing that. I don't know. Let's talk about this. Somebody says, well, why did he think that they wouldn't take her just because he said she's my sister? Somebody would say, it seems like, Wayne said, it seems like it would make her more available. Oh, this is just your sister? We'll take. I don't know. I don't know why he didn't think that. I know there's plenty of things that we do where somebody says, so what were you thinking? How did you think that was going to play out? And we say, I don't know.
The whole thing is a nasty little affair.
Well, I mean, in the ideal world, he could just travel into a place and say, I hope these people don't kill me because you're so good looking.
It also seems like the situation is such that whether he reports that she's his wife, if he says it like that, and their intent, the intent of some would be to actually do violence in order to take her, like in either way, God is going to have to manifest some form of protection, right? Like he's going to have to wind up doing something in either scenario. So.
And so, the way that it happens in 12 and 20, it is manifested. But I believe that in the instance of chapter 20, I think if he had just said, because the people had a knowledge of God and they had a knowledge of right and wrong, because in chapter 20, the ruler is going to say, he says, in the integrity of my heart, I took this woman. And God says, I know that you did in the integrity of your heart. I think if that man had known, oh, she's a married woman, they would have had educated conscience to say, we can't take her. So, this is just one moment to where someone says, well, it's iffy, it's questionable. Well, I will say this, 1 Samuel 16 wasn't questionable. I mean, we all agreed on that one. But when we come to this one, all I'm saying is, I can't decipher all the factors about why they did it, how it could have been better, but what I can say is that is not a false statement.
So the thing is, like, we might be able to have back and forth or whatever about, well, what was the wisest scenario, but at the end of the day, it doesn't qualify as a sin.
That's right. Ian said we can go back and forth all day long about what's the best situation or best scenario and how it could have played out the best, but Ian said at the end of the day, you cannot call that a lie. You cannot call that a sin. That's all we're saying in Genesis 12:13. It really was his sister. And like we said, if you put anybody in a court of law with this information, yeah, we got the same dad, different mom, they would be saying, that's the man's sister. Separate discussion, right, is somebody saying, well, what you marrying your sister for? Well, that's not what we're talking about in here right now. We can do that later, but let's keep going. Okay, we've got 1 Samuel 16. We've got Genesis 12. And for your notes, Genesis 12 is connected to Genesis 20, verse number 12, to where he says, can I say this? Genesis 20, verse number 12 is the only passage where this will ever make sense. So if you don't write that down, that's the only place where you ever get clarification. They got the same dad and a different mother. Genesis 20, verse number 12. Okay, here's one in Genesis 42, and it's just a couple verses. We got to do some reading, and then I'll let somebody explain where the deception is. Okay, James.
For chapter 39.
Of Genesis? Okay, what's that one going to be?
12, verses 12, 13, and 14.
Genesis 39. Okay. Now, we use this one in our class for lying, where it came to pass when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and was fled forth, she called unto the men of her house and spake unto them, saying, he brought in the Hebrew unto mock us, and he came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. So here, this is lying. This is not any type of deception. She's actually changing all of the facts for the purpose of hurting Joseph. So that's from our lying class. Okay, here's our third illustration for ethical deception. This is Joseph. How does Joseph get into Egypt?
He was sold into Egypt.
Who sells him?
Ishmaelites.
No, he goes.
His brother.
That's it. His brothers sell him. Ishmaelites buy him, and they take him into Egypt. So, in Genesis 42, Joseph has become the second in power over all of Egypt. They're having a famine in the land, and all these people are coming in from the outside because they need bread. And it just so happens that he's going to see his brothers for the first time in years. And here is how they interact with each other. So let's talk about this. I can't think off the top of my head. It might be 20 years. So, and I think it's the case that Joseph was 17. Y'all can correct me on that if you would like to. So, if you hadn't seen your siblings in 20 years, like, do y'all think y'all would forget what they look? Would you not recognize them in 20 years? You think so? Okay. Do you,
Possible, especially if their dress had changed, if they were
Okay.
facial hair now.
okay. Tanner doesn't have siblings. Okay, so different people are saying that they think. Wayne says yes. So, is it possible that within 20 years you don't even recognize them? That's possible, but then Ian said a factor too. If they're dressing different, I don't know what all, like how, seriously y'all. You know, we can't trust everything that Hollywood shows us about like what Egyptians looked like. So I don't know the full extent of what the second in command of all of Egypt is looking like. But either way, they do not recognize this man to be their brother. So let's look at how this plays out.
Context matters too. It's like when you remove somebody from one context
That's
to
right.
another, you actually view them as a different person.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is true.
So they're not even going in expecting like, we might see our brother down here.
No
Okay.
way.
That's right.
So for people who didn't hear it, Ian said context matters. I see people, they're like sectarian preachers and we have them on TV, but when I see them at Walmart, I have to really give them a look to say, you know, where do I know them from? So, context matters. Here we are. Here's our text. But bring your youngest brother, Joseph says, bring your youngest brother unto me, so shall your words be verified, and you shall not die. And they did so. And they said one to another, we are verily guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore in this is this distress come upon us. So they're thinking about their brother. They're basically saying, it's now coming back, and we're paying for it. Reuben answered them, saying, spake I not unto you, saying, do not sin against the child, and ye would not hear? Therefore, behold, also his blood is required. Verse 23, and they knew not that Joseph understood them, for he spake unto them by an interpreter. So where is the withholding of information to accomplish a particular goal? What would we say this text is? Ethical deception. Okay, so Betsy says, well, he's withholding the fact that he's their brother. He's not telling that, but what else is going on? They don't recognize him. He doesn't say it. There's one more. So, they come in, like Betsy said, they don't know it's their brother, and he's not saying, hey, I'm your brother. But what also is he giving the illusion of?
That he doesn't even, like, they can basically speak, he doesn't understand what they're saying until it's gone through an interpreter.
Okay. He brings in an interpreter. Does he have to tell them that he understands when he brings the person in? I sit down with someone who speaks Chinese, and let's say for the argument, I speak Chinese, but I'm going to bring an interpreter in anyway. Do I have to tell them on the front end? Now, I'm bringing Ted in to be my interpreter, but guys, I speak Chinese. What are you doing? You actually want to be able to hear what they're saying without them knowing that you're listening. So, how do you feel about that? Is he under moral obligation to tell them, guys, I speak Hebrew over here? He's not under moral obligation to do that. What is he actually getting to do because he did it this way? He, like Betsy said, he doesn't just come out and say, hey, I'm your brother. And he's actually bringing the interpreter in. What is he now getting to do because he brought the interpreter in? He's getting to hear that they actually regret the whole thing, right? He's getting to hear honest conversation. If he had announced to them, I'm Joseph, and you guys are now here needing bread, what would they have said? They would have all been saying, oh, Joseph, we are so sorry that we did that to you. Well, that's going to be everybody's response. But now he's able to really hear honest conversation. How did he do it? By withholding the fact that he could speak their language He used ethical deception to get honest conversation with these people.
He also gets to do a little bit of optics, like if he's acting as a government official, like he gets to be there as a representative of Egypt dealing with these people, instead of it just be like, oh, suddenly I'm just going to transform completely into a Hebrew after I collected all y'all's resources. Now I'm going to agree to share it with these people because they're my people.
Right. So, it still appears with his job that he's just doing his job. Nothing new. With that, I think some people might say, like, why is he giving these guys such a hard time? Because, I mean, he's been sending them in and out, in and out. Okay.
He could have done that. He could have given them a real hard time.
He could have, yeah. And no one would have questioned it either.
That's right.
So, that really goes to our point. This is a good man. He's not abusing people. He's not looking to return evil for evil. He's just doing his job, and he's trying to fill out, we haven't seen each other in 20 years. What are these guys like these days? Well, he finds out they're actually quite remorseful. So he's able to bring them in. Now, this is just one. I know, like, this is just an extra one. We're saying a lot of people would not have, they would not look on these discussions favorably. They would not like the idea of ethical deception. So let's talk about this real quick, because we are going to have application at the end. How would this one be used in modern day? So, Christians are going to operate in different worlds. We're not saying they're going to be sinful, but I'm saying people have different jobs that other people are not going to basically... They'll give their opinion, but they don't know what they're talking about. This is my point. So this is from a government document. Americans go over into a Asian country, and inside of their government building, they actually go through a rigorous screening, right? And they find these people are going to help out. They're Asians. They're going to help out in the building, and they do this very, very rigorous testing to make sure that these Asians can't speak English. Why? Because they don't want the hired help taking American government information back out to the Asian community. This was being done in the 40s. So the American agent brings in a friendly Asian agent, and they begin to speak freely about very, very detailed information. And the Asian agent says to him, "You are being very reckless to talk about this in front of all of your help." And he says, "Well, these guys can't speak English, and we know it. They cannot speak English." And so the Asian says, "Well, okay, if you trust them, I trust them." And so at some point, they all start talking about things that have been stolen from the office, a very expensive bottle of scotch and a typewriter. And they talk about these things in English. The Asian agent begins to say to the Asian servant, he says, "Did you steal a typewriter out of here?" And in the Asian language, he says, "No, I didn't steal a typewriter." And he says, "And I didn't take that bottle of scotch either." And then he said, "Who said anything about a bottle of scotch?" He could speak English. People are going to be using these things all over the place. The point of us studying it is for the purpose of, hey, we can use it to our advantage too, but what's another reason to know how it's done? So that it doesn't happen to you. You do studies of things like this so that you basically know if people are actually trying to pull a fast one on you.
I've been watching Even On Lake.
Yeah.
And you were talking about how we use this. How many people in here know that we actually rented a piece of property for our tent the last 2 years and used a deceptive tactic to make sure that we didn't get shut down?
I know it.
I know you. Nobody else knows it.
Tanner says he knows it.
So we had so much trouble with Danville police and zoning and all of their whatever, so we rent a piece of property that actually has North Carolina on one side and Danville on the other, same owner. Put the tent on the North Carolina side to keep from having to fool around with the Danville city and all their hooligans and shenanigans. Not now, but they used to be this way. And then we parked on the Virginia side. We did that for that reason. And if they came out and tried to do something to us, then we basically showed them the plat. And it's like, you got us. I'm saying we got them.
Yeah.
And you just have to learn to be able to maneuver in like a it's not a dangerous world, but these people are using their power to keep the truth out, right?
Right.
Because they've been using selective enforcement on us for 15 years.
Yeah. So,
I couldn't possibly call that deception. I would call that smart business dealings.
I think everyone's being smart a while ago too.
yeah.
And God said it. I mean, did God not save the king? This is a prophet, don't touch
Yeah.
it. He didn't say, well, that's a really nasty business that he was involved in.
That he got himself into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he actually said, no, this is my property and you don't touch it. So he gets it passed from God.
So he brought up the tent, and there's really, like Wayne said, you pay attention. You recognize people would like to abuse you, maybe. You avoid it just because you're paying attention and you're being wise. Well, that's what he said back in Luke 16 with the unjust steward. He says, the children of this generation are wiser in their generation than the children of light. All he was saying is we need, we call it crafty. 2 Corinthians 13, Paul says, me being crafty, I caught you. Well, one person calls it crafty, and I remember the last time we were in here, the word that Terry used was shifty. Well, that sounds a little bad. But when you're just saying, hey, he was practicing good judgment and wisdom, and he got ahead, well, that's not shifty. It just depends on, and that's really what we're saying about the deception anyways. It is a lot about the intent. Abraham didn't intend for anybody to sin. He just said, I think this is the best route for us to get out of this particular type of danger.
Okay, one more thing. The building inspector actually said to me from North Carolina, because they're friendly, he said, that auction that y'all had up last year, he said, I wouldn't have passed that. And so I said, okay, I won't use it. He said, well, you can go ahead and put up the tent and I'll come by and pass it, and then you put the awning up. Well, we're not going to do that. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, there's different things that if you're in that position that you just have to deal with and know how to do it.
So, and there would actually be a lot of people who would even say back to you, if the agent tells you to do it, then do it. But you just say, we're not going to do that. Yeah. Because he might be the agent on Tuesday, and a new agent come in on Thursday and say, what y'all doing with this awning? So this is Genesis 42. He has no moral obligation to tell them, I speak your language. He has every right to bring an interpreter, and if they want to then infer, oh, he's bringing an interpreter and he cannot speak our language, that's on them. But you don't have a moral obligation to tell them that you speak their language. Now here's one more. We've got multiple more. Joshua 8, this one gets used. I don't think it's the best. Like, it's a military tactic, right? Everybody does this. So in Joshua 7 and 8, the Israelites go out and they fight against the people of Ai. Well, the first time they go out, they are unsuccessful, and they lose about 30 men in the battle, and they get pushed out of the city. But this is the way that they say we're going to go about it now. So Joshua arose and all the people of war to go up against Ai, and Joshua chose out 30,000 mighty men of valor and sent them away by night, and he commanded them, saying, behold, ye shall lie in wait against the city, behind the city, go not very far from the city, but be ye already. And I and all the people that are with me, we will approach the city, and it shall come to pass when they come out against us at the first, that we will flee before them, till we have drawn them. He says they will come out after us, till we have drawn them from the city, for they will say, they flee before us, as at the first. Therefore we will flee before them. Then shall ye rise up, go from the ambush, and seize upon the city, and the Lord your God will deliver it into your hand. So, what is the ethical deception here in this scripture? You're withholding information to accomplish a particular goal. When they're running, does a captain of an army have the right to say, it's time to retreat? Does he then have to explain to everybody, this is why we're retreating? And then someone from the crowd says, is this a legitimate retreat? He doesn't have to go through all that. He just says, we're leaving the city. And if the enemy makes up in their mind, says, boy, we're just beating them to death and they're out of here, as they're running away from the city, does Joshua have to holler back to the people, now we got soldiers on the backside of the city? It's withheld information all the way around. Our retreat is not legitimate. We have people waiting behind the city. You all fell prey, basically, by jumping to conclusions. It would have been very easy for somebody to say, maybe a couple of us need to hang back with the city, instead of taking everybody out of the city.
And I don't think people when as we're talking about deception, whether or not there's a way to be ethically deceptive, I don't think that people, when they read this passage, would actually balk at this. I think when they read it, they go, man, what a great job. But it's the idea of using it outside of the context of war that suddenly people have a problem with.
Yeah.
But then there's a type of war that we engage in today, right? That's like, there's physical warfare with earthly weapons, and then there's kind of engaging now. It's like, well, if there's a spiritual warfare that's taking place and you would approve this, why wouldn't you use it spiritually?
Right. And so,
Recording people in their assemblies. They basically say that we're being deceptive by not showing them the recorder. And we say, no, it is not deception that is wrong. It is not letting you see it. But then they turn around and create a new law themselves. Lawyer named Williams created that scenario where it says you're breaking the law as a trespasser if you record in here without permission. That is not a Virginia state code law.
Yeah.
But the prosecutor might know it anyway. So they just make things up as they go, and then they try to build a conscience problem with us because we're catching them teaching false doctrine without them.
So, I thought he was going a different route. Somebody says, well, you shouldn't record us without our knowledge. There's all kinds of recording in the Bible without people's knowledge. Acts chapter 4, Acts chapter 5, they go in and have a closed-up meeting. Well, then somehow it gets known to everybody. So, you say, well, the Holy Spirit showed it to them. What? Well, that's basically how we work a recorder device. They had no way to hear it. He gives them the information. So, Ian said you take it outside of the particular realm. So does anybody know that? I don't know who he was talking to, but Sam Walton was going to do a really big business deal with somebody. And so he invites that person to dinner, and the man thinks we're just having dinner. But actually Sam Walton is watching this person, and he's basically saying this is the guy's character. How you behave when you think we're outside of the interview. So there's two stories that get told. One is the man was going through the buffet line, and he grabs a thing of butter for his plate, and then he grabs a thing of butter and he puts it in his pocket. And so Sam Walton says, if you'll steal from the buffet, you'll steal from me. And then the second story is that as they're sitting down at the table, somebody, before they even taste the food, they just start salting it. And then he says, well, if you're not even going to test stuff, you won't test stuff on the job. You'll just think you have the right way of thinking. My point is, the person could say, well, I didn't know we were doing an interview already. I thought we were just having a meal. He has the right to basically say in his mind this is an evaluation, regardless of whether or not the person knows it. And you know, that happens all over the place. I don't remember what they were doing. The first cruise I went on when I graduated, I went with my aunt, and we were at a dinner table with a bunch of Catholics. And the Catholics invited us on Sunday. They said, well, maybe you can go with us to Mass on Sunday. And he said, see how Catholics live. And I said, I've been seeing how Catholics live all week. Well, they say, well, that's not how you're supposed to make the judgment. See, they don't know that. That's just life, that you're a Catholic outside of Sunday. So we've got one more. Man, we've got more than one more. We've got so many good examples, y'all, for ethical deception where a lot of people would say, I don't like this. Well, not liking it doesn't make it wrong. We're going to use this one. Ahab called Obadiah. This is Ahab and Jezebel are killing all of the prophets in Israel. These righteous folk killing all the prophets. Obadiah feared the Lord greatly, for it was so, when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, that Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50 in a cave, and fed them with bread and water. And now thou sayest, go tell the Lord, behold, Elijah is here, he shall slay me. What's the deception? The deception, we said, is withholding information to accomplish a particular goal. What's Obadiah's deception? Does he have to tell people? I got 50, what is it? How many people? I got 100 people, 150 people held up in a cave out here. In reality, y'all, we would do very well to recognize this is more than deception. What else is he doing here? That's it. Harboring an enemy of the state is counted as treason in our American laws. This man, if he were alive today, would be counted as a treasonous individual. He just, y'all are doing your thing, and when Obadiah disappears for a while with a bunch of water and bread, it's his business. Someone might say, well, I just don't know about treason. Well, when you get to a point like this, I think you will be just fine with some treason. When they're just out here killing people because they disagree as far as religious factors, yeah, I'd be for that. It's withholding information. And Obadiah fears the Lord greatly. He's a good individual, favorable discussion points. This is our last one. So I don't really know, I'll tell you, we are out of time. We've got 10 minutes. I don't really know the ins and the outs of how a Jew viewed himself. And what I mean by that, I mean Sadducees, Pharisees, the Essenes. I don't know if they basically wore that as a political badge, and you're always that. But look at this text in Acts 23, 6 and 7. In other places, you're going to hear Paul say, I was raised up a Pharisee. And he said, I'm the son of a Pharisee. And then he says, and I sat at the feet of Gamaliel, who is a doctor of the law. But now look at this text. Why, in Acts 23, why do they have Paul in this trial anyways? The Jews all know they disagree with him. He's teaching Jesus. They hate Jesus. And look at this scene. When Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other were Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Of the hope and resurrection of the dead I am called in question. And when he had so said, there arose a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the multitude was divided. Now, the goal that he accomplished was the attention is now off of him. And they're fighting with each other. But what is the point that somebody could say was a little bit of deception?
He knows he doesn't number himself among the Pharisees.
Okay. Practicing Pharisees. If he, at the moment where he said, hey, I'm a Pharisee, somebody could have very easily spoken up from the crowd and said, Paul, you have not been to Jerusalem in 14 years. Some Pharisee you are. But he played his card, and they fell for it. Now, who's the righteous person in this scenario? Paul, Pharisees, or Sadducees? Paul, this is not a trick question. He is the righteous person. What do they want to do to him, Sadducees and Pharisees? They would like to kill him, except the Roman government is going to step in. So here's the thing. Can Paul actually see what would you call their just blind zeal and take advantage of it? I think that he can do that. It's like, I can't think of one right now, but I'm saying, you're in a room, somehow I'm equally hated by Republicans and Democrats, and then I just bring up politics. Why? Because I know they'll all start fighting with each other, and then I just kind of slip on out. He's not a practicing Pharisee. He hasn't been to their feast days in 14 years, says Galatians chapter 2. Now let's look at our last moment. How are we going to be using this type of information? Boy, we had a bunch. And we didn't even get to yours, James. What did you say, 1 Kings 19?
1 Samuel 19:17.
Yeah, 1 Samuel 19:17. So let's look at how you would use this today. Let's say, am I doing anything wrong? This is our illustration. I'd like to change Ian's mind on something. But I don't want to just, Ian, you and I need to have a sit down. So I'd like to change Ian's mind, so I give him a book. And I say to Ian, this book has a great section on water baptism. But really, I don't care so much, because I already know he knows the truth on water baptism. I don't really care about that section so much. I want him to read the part about the one church. Let's say Ian wasn't a Christian. What am I doing? I'm not telling him exactly everything that I want him to see, but I'm saying Ian's going to read the whole book, so I know he's going to see it. Is it wrong if I market it as something of another topic?
No, because then that information you want me to see hits me before my defense is about to go up.
There you go. Now here they are. In our community, a local false teacher writes a new book, and I invite him on to the broadcast to talk about his new book. What does he think we're doing? He thinks we're promoting his book. What am I wanting to do? I want to show the community why the book is false doctrine. Do I have to tell him at the beginning of the discussion? I'm going to be grilling your book, man. Did he actually get to promote his book? He got to tell everybody it exists.
2 weeks ago he did.
Yeah, and he tells them where to find it. But I'm telling you, it's not worth the money you're going to spend on it. This is really what we're working at. Acts 9:25. Everybody in Damascus, Jerusalem, all these different places are hunting a man named Paul. The government is persecuting, and I'm saying an aspect of the government, is persecuting Christians. And somebody says, we're going to have to let this dude down the wall in a basket to get him out of the city. And then somebody's going to come in and say, I don't know if my conscience is going to let me do that. There are people, y'all, that are so wedded to the American government that they would actually let their own brethren hang out to dry because of their conscience. They need to educate their conscience. This information is all over the Bible. So let's say this, y'all. What do y'all think y'all are going to do when the government just says, hey, forget 10 people assemblies, y'all don't assemble at all. Sunday morning there's a curfew, just like there is Saturday night, and you don't come out. What are you going to do? I'm going to be sneaking somewhere. And this is all over the text. People say, well, we're Bible believers. Look, this is in the Bible as much as anything else. There has to be an element that's going to actually keep it going while everybody else sits by. Why? So that people 50 years, 70 years from now can say, man, we're glad those people kept it going and we get to have it today. And it's going to take a little bit of this type of thinking to get there. Just like Luke 16, the Lord said, these people are wiser than these people. We got to be practicing some wisdom. Okay, that's our slides. Here's application. No, that's it.
That's it.
Yeah.
One last thing. In order for us to give the same rights as everybody else, like at the Chatham meeting where free speech, a Pennsylvania County meeting, I called ahead of time and said, is there any obligations that the press has to meet? And they said no. So we went in with our press cards on, and what did they do?
They said, you're not press.
You're not press. And I was going to argue, and they said, that man said you're leaving and you're leaving. So what do? We asked Charles for a official Star News press card. We've never used it, but I'm just saying. That's us operating against people who don't even respect their own laws.
Right.
Just like that situation.
Right. And really these things are all over the place, and it's just the case that a lot of people just don't know that these opportunities are there. And a lot of them, someone would say, well, it sounds, what was it? What was the? Shifty. It sounds shifty. Well, in actuality, a lot of these different principles, the law itself allows for it. So, like we said, people just need to be educating their conscience. Okay, we'll stop here. The upcoming classes, Ian said that he's going to be looking at studying, what'd you call it? Corrupt communication. And then I'm going to do a part 2 follow-up to his unmerciful. So we'll get to have another unmerciful class. Okay, we'll take a break and we'll come back in.